Hello, and thank you for joining us on the June 2017 Ask Andrew Show, Canada's first Facebook live streaming family Q&A show. My name is Andrew Feldstein, and I'm the managing partner here at Feldstein Family Law Group, and I practice exclusively in family law. Today's guest is Toronto family therapist Joanna Seidel. We'll be discussing children and divorce, and please feel free to send us your questions in the comments section. Let's begin. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I'm a practicing family therapist in Toronto, and I specialize in separation and divorce, working with families and children in high conflict situations. And I'm a custody and access assessor. So I basically offer a lot of services with respect to separation and divorce.
And do you, when you say you offer lots of services, is there one service you offer more than any others?
I work with children, I work with families. I often help families create parenting plans in the best interest of their children. So, I mean, I think I offer a variety of services as separating families, experience their journey of separating and living in two homes and having to raise children.
Okay, now today's show is focusing on children and divorce, so maybe you can help me understand what your role is that you deal with children, whether it's on a Section 30 assessment or developing a parenting plan or in any other capacity.
So there's so many different capacities that I work with children. Section 30 is one way, which is a custody and access assessment, and Section 112 is an Office of the Children's Lawyer custody and access assessment. So I work with a family over a period of 90 days or more and gathering information to make some recommendations about how they can settle their parenting plan and how they can move forward in parenting children. I also speak to parents a lot about how to tell children that they're separating and how to make their lives more predictable around their separation. And I work with children who are experiencing some emotions around separating or are having difficulty with the changes in their family.
Okay, I'm going to start with something you mentioned, which is the Section 112, so that our viewers can understand that. That's in accordance with the Courts of Justice Act of Ontario. And that means that Joanna gets hired by the Office of the Children's Lawyer to get involved in a family's life after a court has actually made an order appointing their involvement. And I know a lot of people they find it very stressful when they go through the Office of Children's Lawyer or get a Section 30 assessment. And maybe if you could give some understanding of what you would do in a Section 112.
So I want to start by, saying that people look at a custody and access assessment, whether it's Section 30 or Section 112, and they find it very stressful. But I want to revisit my role, and my role is to help these families move forward. And to help them try to settle on some recommendations that would be in the best interest of the children. So to walk you through that process is what we do is we gather information about the family. So we'll speak to each parent a number of times, interviewing them. We'll meet with the children so they have a voice depending on their stage and development in the proceedings. And we go into their home, we do a home observation visit, and we speak to people that we call personal collaterals and professional collaterals. And these are people who can tell us a little bit about how the family functions. And then we make some recommendations based on our observations. So that's a very brief understanding of an assessment. And of course, I more thoroughly explain it to a client who walks into my office or a lawyer telling their client. But basically, my job is to help these families move forward and try to settle their dispute. And if they're not able to settle based on my recommendations or a modification, then I will file a report that will go in front of the judge and may go to trial. The family may go to trial, and I may testify on my report.
Now, if you had to give advice to someone who's about to embark on the process, where now you've been appointed and the Office of Children's Lawyer has hired you and you're reaching out to contact the parents, would there be any advice that you would give to the parents of what they should do to prepare to meet with you?
Well, I think that they should go in fully informed, right? If they're represented by their legal counsel, ask their lawyer to walk them through the process. Be informed about the steps. Go into the first intake interview with the assessor and ask questions. So my advice would be to be fully informed. I can understand that it would be a stressful process, but try to understand that it's in the best interest of the children. So we're trying to help these families move forward and give guidance around, they might be in a state of conflict, and we're trying to help them get out of that.
Now, one of the things I get clients who are frequently concerned is they say to me, Andrew, my spouse is going to be raising an issue that I'm seeing a therapist or a counselor, and they're really concerned that they view that as a negative. And I try to tell them that I think someone in your world usually views that as a positive because it means they're dealing with problems.
Absolutely. You're right on the ball with that. Absolutely. People who reach out and get some expert advice and get some help around parenting their children after separation are only going into this process with good information. Be informed, right? Know how to support your children through this transition, and know how to support yourself, right? As an individual, someone may be going through a lot of grief around their separation, and they may lose insight on how that's impacting their children. But going to see an expert and getting some information and having someone who can challenge them on those things can be very helpful and very therapeutic and highly regarded in any context.
Now, one of the other things you mentioned earlier was you also help parents tell the children that they're splitting up. What type of advice do you give, and is it different depending on the ages of the children?
So it's very different. Depending on the age of the children, because an older children will understand it more and also want more of a voice, right? Children are very curious, and some are feeling insecure. They want to understand how their life is going to change over their parents' decision to divorce. So we have to remember that children don't wake up in the morning and make that decision. They don't choose that today I'm going to wake up and my parents are going to divorce. So you really want to make their life predictable around that, and talk to them about the process, and take into consideration their age and stage of development. And I help parents do this.
Now, is it better if the parents do it together, or should each of them do it separate?
So it's always better that parents do this work together. These parents went into their marriage together. They had children together. They are tied to life. They're tied for life. So if they can present it to the children in a collaborative and communicative way, they're making the first demonstration to the children that they are still their parents. And that role hasn't changed, and they're in this together. Their marriage may have diffused, their romantic relationship may have diffused, but they're in this together, and that's not changing.
Okay, I know from personal experience, it's probably one of the hardest things anyone ever has to do in their life. Have you had many clients have problems arising because they told the children together?
I mean, every family situation is different. So, I mean, there could always be challenges. But I mean, I still believe and stand by that telling your children together is the best way. Now, is life perfect? No. Are they going to experience stress? Absolutely. Their life is changing. But part of helping your children is helping them through stress.
Okay.
Right? Helping them experience stress in their life and showing them we can move forward.
Now, one of the biggest problems I've had with clients is when one of the spouses is cheated, they've wanted to incorporate that into the discussion with the children as to the reason for the divorce. And we obviously counsel our clients not to do that, but is that something you've experienced, and how do you tell people not a good idea?
So infidelities are brought into conflict all the time, right? And loyalty binds are made, right? Somebody cheated and they want to create an alliance with their children, right? So when someone has an affair and the children get involved, What they want, the other parent wants to make an alliance, so that we're the team. You've betrayed the entire family through this affair, right? That's often what parents want to communicate. Dad did this, or mom did this, right? This is why our family is experiencing this. Not a good message for the children, right?
Well, it's a terrible message, but that's why parents aren't supposed to say it, but some can't resist. I see on Twitter, we had a question come in that says, my child assumes he did something wrong and thinks he caused the divorce. How does therapy help that?
That's a wonderful question. And most children, not most, a lot of children often do absorb the blame, and they ask questions. Is it my fault? Is mom mad at me? Is dad mad at me? I did this. And this is where it's really important to leave the children out of the separation. Leave the children out of the conflict, because they're internalizing it. They're thinking that if they did something different, their life circumstances could have changed. And that's probably not true. So therapy helps in terms of helping communication and a dialogue. Be honest with your children, right? Be respectful towards them, and alleviate them of that responsibility of taking the blame for the family separation. And it's very therapeutic if you can have a good dialogue around that.
Now, what are some common questions that you're asked by children?
Well, just that question around, is this my fault? Did I do this? Right? And I think one of the most common questions is children are in great fear about how their life is going to change. And they're really curious, right? They want to know, where am I going to live? Who am I going to live with? Am I going to change schools? So there are often a lot of logistical questions about how their life is going to look like after the separation. Some of my older clients will ask me about, children in the law, that they want to know information. They've read something on the internet, right? I just had a client the other day, an 11-year-old girl who said to me, when I'm 12 years old, does that mean I can choose where I want to live? So all of these, so children are curious. The other thing that children often ask me is to help them intervene. How can I tell my parents to stop fighting? How can I tell my parents to stop calling me and asking me about the other parent?
And one of the most frustrating things I think I hear from clients, and as a lawyer, there really isn't that much we can do to help, is that parents are supposed to get regular telephone or FaceTime with the children when they're not in the care. And frequently one parent enables it to happen and the other parent makes sure it doesn't happen. Have you had that discussion with parents, explaining them how they should be allowing those calls to take place and the children should be able to communicate with the other parent freely?
So it's almost a daily conversation that happens in my office, right? Parents want the right to interact with their children every day on a daily basis. And yes, I coach parents. They should have the freedom to do so. Now, it's a little bit daunting when it's structured at 6 p.m. You need to call your dad or your mom every day, right? Because they could be occupied in activities. But what I say is I say to children and parents, try to have a touch point every day. Try to have a conversation where you can touch base and talk about your day and just have that connection daily, because that's how you really stay involved in your children's lives.
Well, I know I see lots of clients complain the calls don't happen and the other spouse says the call, they try to tell the kids to make the call. And I know when I say to my clients, a big part of it is when you tell a child to make the call. If you're going to a child and tell them it's time that you should call the other parent and you know they're watching their favorite TV show, you know they're not going to want to make that call. And when that parent says, look, I told the child to call, it wasn't a real effort, versus giving the phone to a child to make the call at a time when you know they're interested. And I don't know if you see that kind of game taking place often.
I see that, and I definitely see parents not giving their children enough privacy during the calls, right? Interrupting a really important time of their day to make the calls, and children aren't going to respond favorably to that, right? They're under pressure. That's a lot of pressure for a child. So, first of all, a parent should call the child. A child That's the way it should be set up. A child shouldn't have to call the parent. The parent calls to check in. It's like when your child is at a sleepover, right? You often call to check in. How are you doing, right? So it's the same thing. Parents should be calling their children, checking in. Do you have time to speak? And parents know their children. They should know what a good time of the day is.
Now, I saw we had some question come in again on Twitter. It was another one. And that question is it possible to be too honest with your kids? And if a spouse cheats, should you tell them?
So these are all great questions that are coming in. And it's of course you can be too honest with your children, right? Children are innocent. Do they really need to know all the adult information around intimacy? Do you talk to your children about your own intimacy when you're married? Probably not. So that's what you're doing to your children when you're sharing about an affair. You're talking to them about a very adult issue that you want to teach them to keep private, right? It's also finances get talked about a lot, right? You want to protect the children from that. As adults, we have to figure out our own finances and do our own budgets and make decisions about what we can afford. We can't keep saying to our children, oh, I can't afford this because daddy doesn't pay me enough support, right? That's really stressful for children to hear.
And unfortunately, I see that happening all the time. Someone says, well, I can't sign you up for this because, daddy or mommy doesn't want to pay. And the reality is daddy or mommy may be paying a lot of support, and that creates a real problem because how much does one side say to counter what the other side did? And that's a real fine balancing act that you want to keep the kids out of if you can.
That's right.
And I'm going to change topics a little bit because we had a couple of emails come in before the show that are more legal related. So I'm going to read one of the emails I received last night. And this is from an anonymous person. It says, not sure where to begin. My husband is beyond dishonest. He managed to have double family for years. I do not have physical proof, just pictures from his vacations with his mistress on 3 occasions that were supposed to be business trips, and long emails with his mistress and copies of flight tickets. I also have credit card statements where he's spending lots of money on his mistress. Meanwhile, he's not paying equally on our home expenses. Under pretense of friendship, my husband was also exposing his lover to our toddler. Sometimes he told me after that he saw this lady at the playground. He does not want to leave our home and keeps telling all proof is a lie. I feel stuck and vulnerable. We said a lot of mean words to each other. I even drafted several separation agreements that never got signed. Those I no longer agree with since, as I found more facts about the affair. I first tolerated his lies because I had no facts, and after because I was confident he is bipolar. Later, I understood he is not bipolar, as he has fits of violence were intentional, and he shows his mistress that we are divorcing. She goes on, and you can see that this person is really consumed by the adultery, and on an emotional level, I get how it's very hurtful. From a family law perspective, though, there's different considerations that are taking place here that are jumping off the page at me as a lawyer. Mm-hmm. Number one, a court is not going to view the husband favorably if, in fact, he was introducing his child or children to the mistress. That's a really negative thing, I think, to have done. And ultimately, a court's going to be called upon to make a decision about what's in the best interest of the child. I'd love for you to chime in on those parenting issues, Joanna, if you could.
So, specifically about introducing new partners?
Well, this wasn't introducing a new partner in this fact scenario. You introduced the new partner while he's still with the wife.
Right.
And I think that would be seen as highly problematic, unless the person was already in the family as a friend or something of that nature.
Well, I think you have to look at the situation as a whole and it not, and I know you're going through it piece by piece as it unravels, but I mean, it's this person is making some real poor decisions here, right? And using poor judgments generally. So how is this going to impact his parenting as a whole? How is he going to be able to parent these children and protect them from harm if he's making some really poor decisions? So that's how you may look at it, as a whole. Certainly, if he's led a double family, I mean, it's quite a betrayal and quite hurtful to the wife. and you would want, I mean, you would want to refer her to get some therapy around the emotional aspects of this, before even dealing with the legal situation, because there's a lot of emotional stuff that I heard in that, you know, that are different from the legal situation. So I would want to help this client, you know, with all the emotional heartache and all the emotional stuff, so she's really able to negotiate legally.
Well, the interesting thing is, from a legal perspective, the fact that the husband had a mistress won't impact the support obligations and the financial obligations. It may impact slightly equalization if you can prove a large amount of money was spent on the mistress. And I'm not talking about a few $1,000s here or there. I'm saying a really significant amount of money that's going to shock the conscience of the court, because you're saying to a court it would be unconscionable to have a normal equalization because this person depleted our money recklessly on this other person. So I find it a lot of clients find it very painful when they tell you about their spouse's infidelity. And from a legal standpoint, for the most part, I shrug my shoulders and I say there isn't much that I can do. This individual, in the way he's lived a double life, may very well have stepped over the boundaries of demonstrating to a court that he's not terribly concerned with his child or children, and he's exercised some really poor judgment. That's something that will hurt him in the course of a custody dispute, if there is one. At least that's my legal viewpoint of that particular fact pattern. And I see we have another question coming in on YouTube right now, which is, my child is against seeing a therapist. Thinks it means they are crazy. Can you give a tip for explaining to kids?
Well, I mean, that child, you know, probably doesn't have a good understanding of what therapy is and what is the purpose of it, right? So I think you would really want to give the child as much information as they can. That why is the child going for therapy? Is it in context of a separation and divorce? And what is that parent observing with that child that warrants therapy, right? Is that parent observing anxiety in the child? Well, then I would probably say to the child, I'm really concerned. Here's what I've seen over the last few months. I've seen, you know, some behavioral issues. I've seen that your grades haven't been kept up. I've seen you've lost interest in activities. Like, I would give some real good information about why I'm suggesting a therapist. And don't forget, children have lots of opinions, right? They don't like things and they like lots of things. And they should have a voice, but we have to weigh in on how much of a voice they have.
Okay, now I got another, this question came in, I believe, on Facebook, and it came in just before the show started. And the person asks, and I apologize for looking down and reading my phone, can you please explain the family law trial process? How does a judge decide on a matter? Can he refuse to accept evidence without giving reasons pertaining to support or equalization, and what grounds? This question goes on and it's longer, but that's a real loaded question, because a trial has formal evidence that usually will take place. That means both parties will have gone on a witness stand, just like you'd see on TV, swear an oath, give evidence, be subject to cross-examination. And at the end of the day, a trial judge will hear all of the evidence that both sides put forward, and a trial judge will make a written ruling that will lay out the reasons for why they're doing what they're doing. This suggestion is, can the judge just refuse to hear some evidence? Well, during the course of a trial, there can be objections as to whether or not evidence meets the burden of proof to becoming evidence, and there can be objections to it that it's not relevant. It can be objections about the authenticity of it, and a judge can make a ruling on that. The reasons could be long or short regarding the admissibility of evidence. That gets to be very, very technical when we get into the rules of evidence during the course of a trial. But that's a good part of the reason why we frequently say to people, get a lawyer if you're going to trial, because you're going in, especially if the other side has a lawyer, with a tremendous disadvantage, because you're not going to understand the rules of evidence. You're not going to understand how you need to make your case. And that's why we always say to people, if you're going to have a trial, you should have a lawyer. If you're not going to have a lawyer, then at least hire a lawyer as a coach to advise you on how to run your trial in order to give you the best possible chance to succeed with your trial. Now, one of the other questions I had for you that I haven't reached yet is, are there any online resources or offline support groups that you can recommend that parents, A, for themselves who are going through divorce, and B, that they can enroll their children in?
So the internet is full of information, right? So the internet's full of really great resources too. And of course, you have to make some good judgment about whether you're reading a good resource. But certainly there is lots of information about, separating and divorce on the Attorney General's website. There's also lots of information. Riverdale Mediation has a great resource page. Bill Eddy, who's who's a significant speaker in the field, has really good articles on his website around tips for parents about communication. So there's lots of resources that you can look at on the internet that will really help families through this journey. And there's lots of support groups. So Family and Transitions runs great programs where one parent participates in it at a time, and the child has a group running at the same time. Jewish Family Services runs great groups. There's one in particular, 2 homes, 1 family, and it's open to all cultures. And then there's just your local children's mental health agency, which has resources and support and groups for children and families going through this transition.
Well, I think that'd be very helpful for people to understand that, because I know I have a lot of clients who ask me questions about where they can go. And I see a question just came on Facebook. How do you feel about reintegration therapy when the children are alienated?
So, I mean, that's a very common question. And you have to be at a place where the conflict in the family, when we're talking about reintegration therapy, it's a very complicated question. But in order for it to be successful, I do recommend it. But both parents really need to be on board. They need to come into that therapy prepared that both of them need to do the work to make the children feel safe, loving the other parent. And this is very complicated because some parents come with they've done some damage, right? Justifiably. They've caused some problems, and the children are aware of it, and they find it very, very difficult to be with that parent, so they resist contact. Where some parents, so alienation is a very, very big term, and I think it comes with it comes with influence. It could come with influence, but it could also come with some justifiable reasons that the children are resisting contact, and we need to understand it, right? Estrangement is generally not good for a child, right? So we need to really do an assessment and look into these families' circumstances, and then make good recommendations about how we're going to reintegrate. But it starts with both parents needing to be on board and being really open to the idea that they need to do some work to help the child reconnect with the parent who they're resisting contact with.
Now, I noticed part of the question included alienation. I see frequently when there's an alienation case, the parent that's doing the alienation is not going to be the least bit cooperative, even if ordered to be, as part of the reintegration. How do you deal with that problem?
Well, I think you get into really complicated waters there. That's a problem that we're all trying to broach. And I think that you need to educate. It comes with education. I often educate the parents about what's the future impact for these children, right? Because children who don't learn how to stay in relationships when it's really difficult, right? They end up having insecure attachments later on in life. They end up having problems, even at the current time, problems in school, problems with learning, behavioral problems. There's a real impact when children get entangled in this. So I find that education is the best resource. And I want to really understand the parent who is the so-called alienating parent. I want to understand where that parent is coming from. What's going on with them? Why aren't they giving permission for their child to have a loving relationship with the other parent? And so once you understand that part, the work becomes a little bit, the work can flow from there. It's difficult work though. It's complicated.
I know it's very complicated, and I know it's sometimes from a lawyer's perspective, probably the same from your perspective, the most draining and exhausting and frustrating kind of work, because it takes a long time through the court system to be able to achieve what you're looking for in cases where there's horrific alienation and one parent hasn't seen the child in years, and you're trying to clean up that mess.
Right.
And I know when I've been involved in those, it's very painful. We're going to do one more question because it's just about time for us to wind up. And this is from Twitter. My child is telling all of his friends about our divorce. It's embarrassing. Should I tell him not to discuss?
So, I mean, I think children have the right to share, right? Children have the right to share and build their friendships. But I think that some children really become entrenched in the details of the divorce. And especially if there was like a traumatic detail, like the police were called or the affair or something big, and then they go and they report it, they tell it to everybody, and that's the way they relieve their stress. We need to tell children, what's private, what's family matters, right? And what you can share with others, right? Like you can share your feelings. If you're hurt or you're stressed out, talk to your friend about it. But if there's a private matter that's going on in our family, talk to an adult. And this is where you can talk to a therapist. It sounds like, that's a really good introduction to therapy. It sounds like you have a really big need to talk about what's happening in the home, right? I'm going to give you a place to do that where it's private.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, and that's a great answer. I wanted to thank you for joining us on the show today because we're actually past our time. And the next Ask Andrew show will be July 20th at 1 p.m. And if anyone has a request for a certain topic or guest, feel free to email us at info@feldsteinfamilylawgroup.com or message us here on Facebook. And thanks again for watching. I also want to thank Joanna for coming on the show. I forgot to mention that. And we have her card there as a child and family therapist with her contact information. And we recommend for those of you who need her services to contact her. And thank you for watching.